So I've got my master cylinder, I've got my top line I'm going to use that's already there. It's going to feed into my splitter. Splitter's going to go out to the right side, left side. I've got a new banjo, new lower brake line, the soft one. I got a new hard brake line for the right side. We got caliper, we got caliper bolts, we got rotor bolts. So step one is removing the speedometer cable. I like these vice grips. They have a curved spot in the middle. They're really good for taking off these lines. That'll keep you from messing up the threads on the lines. Shouldn't be on there super tight anyhow, but just make sure you don't strip it out. Just want to drop them to the bottom. That way when I get the other side loose, the wheel doesn't just fall off on me. I'll loosen them evenly. I want to lift up on the wheel with my hand, take the weight off of it so it doesn't just drop out of there. Take my cap off, switch hands, and just holding the weight off so it doesn't just drop. I'm just going to roll this out from under here. So basically, it threads in through this side, so I'm going to use my smaller wrench to hold it in place. And this should not be super tight. I'm going to use my larger wrench. We're going to loosen this up just like you would a nut or a bolt. So I'm going to go left and right, and then my axle will unscrew. So I'm up on my work surface. I'm just going to unscrew this. Once you get to a certain point, the axle will pull up out of here. And again, make sure you've got a nice clean spot to put that because you don't want to get that contaminated. So with that off, I'm going to take these 3 screws out of this for the hub cover. These are number 2 screws, not number 3s like on the engine. Get this piece off. As you can see, it looks just like the other side, except for you don't have to see the bearing assembly. Alright, so after we get the dust boot off, we're going to take our axle, drop it back in. If you got this gooed up, contaminated in any way, shape, or form, put a little bit of axle grease back on there before you drop it back in. I kept mine clean. It's only been out for a few seconds, so if you've got to leave it off for a few days to do something, make sure you clean that up properly before you put it back in. Again, just snug. Back up on my workbench. I'm gonna go ahead and bleed off my brake system. So I've turned my wheel all the way to the left, so basically it's running downhill the best I can. I'm gonna take the top off. I've got like a baby nose suction bulb, and I'm gonna draw the fluid out of here that I can. I'm gonna break the bleeder loose at the bottom. I'm just going to keep filling the top up with .3 or .4 and keep pushing the fluid down the line, try to get all the fluid out of there that I can. One more thing to make a note of is since we are working with brake fluid, my fender's right there. I'm going to go get a towel and cover my fender up too. Just got an empty water bottle here. Again, baby nose sucker. I'm just going to draw all this fluid out of here that I can. Again, go with a .4. Real careful not to dump it down my paint. Hand underneath it, rag underneath it if you have to. I just poked a small hole in it too, so I'm not going to just pour it super fast. I'm going to put more in here than actually belongs in here, because again we're going to bleed it all the way through. I'm going to drain the cylinder probably at least once, maybe twice, and this is the original master cylinder. I have not changed it yet. Just got to keep the tubing there. I'm going to break the bleeder loose. Trying to keep the bottle from tipping over until it gets started. And what we definitely don't want to do is we don't want the cylinder to run loose or run empty up top. So you got to keep an eye on your master and make sure it doesn't run empty on you. These are if your bike's not hanging from the rafters. I don't want to pull that all the way out. I just want to break it loose. And in a second we should get some flow going through it. As you can see, I've got fluid dripping into there now. Again, whatever you do, don't make sure your master cylinder doesn't run dry, because you don't want to run this completely empty. All right, so I'm down to a drip now, so I'm going to go ahead and close my bleeder. I'm not going to tighten it all the way because we're going to break this loose and bleed them off again, but I don't want to forget it, so I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up by hand. That way when I add the new fluid to it, it doesn't run all over the place. All right, so my master cylinder is cleaned out. I wiped it out really good. I wiped off the boot and I put the lid back on it so it wouldn't get any dirt in it. So I'm going to take off the master cylinder now. And I'm going to take these pieces off one at a time as I work my way down. So from here, loosen the stem on it. Just get that loose. The mirror just threads out. Next thing I want to take off is my brake line. Now, since we drained all the fluid out of it, we shouldn't lose anything, but I've still got paper towel or something ready, just in case we lose a little bit. There still may be a little bit in this back end of the neck. Come out a little bit easier. And washer on the ground. Again, as you can see, I didn't really lose any fluid. A couple little drops here and there, though. So the next step, there's 2 8mm bolts through the front of the master cylinder. Take them off evenly. If you wanted to, you could mark your handle so you can put it on the exact same spot. I'll probably reposition mine anyhow, so that's all there is to getting the master off. One more thing to note, if you look on the bottom of your master cylinder, this one says 14, so that's a 14mm. The new one actually says 5/8 on it. That way you know you've got the right master cylinder for what you're trying to do. Single brake, the 14's plenty. Again, dual brakes, you want the 5/8. Just gonna start my bolts. Try not to drop it down in the engine if you do drop it. And even though I took that off with an impact, I'm not going to tighten it with an impact. You want to tighten them up by hand. Watch when you're getting against your throttle. You don't want to get it too close. You want the lever to clear, so make sure you leave it a little distance there. Don't butt it all the way up against your throttle. There's my new master. Putting on the compression washers. Putting it on the same way it came off. Once I get it hand tight, I'm going to make sure my line's going straight down. I don't want it to come off like to the front or the back. I want it to pretty much go straight down. And then this doesn't get super tight either. When you go to tighten it though, your line's going to want to try to creep up like mine just did. So you got to make sure you hold the line with one hand and then tighten the screw or the nut with the other. Bolt, banjo, whatever you want to call it. So I'm going to break my lines loose, and again, we shouldn't lose much fluid here, but we may lose a little. So you want to make sure you got a rag ready once you get them loose. So I'm just going to break it loose. Break that one loose. And then grab me a towel so I can sop up anything that drips down. The other thing we got to do is we got to take off our brake light switch, which is on the side over here. That just unthreads, so I'm going to unhook the lines to it. Turn my bars the other way so I can get to these easier. Don't want to snap them off, so. Again, making sure I'm catching brake fluid because I am getting a couple drips here and there. Make sure your paint is protected as well. My banjo. And the washer, I'm going to put it on the same way I took it off. Leave a second rag underneath there too, just to soak up anything extra. Set my banjo down. Take off the top banjo. And just a little bit of fluid from each one of these, but not a lot. So my lines are loose, my switch is unplugged. Two 10mm bolts in the middle here. Take those out. And my splitter is off. This should just spread out of here fairly easily. Not sure who put it in there, but I had to actually put a little bit of pressure on there to get it to come loose. Here's my new splitter. Again, a little bit of Teflon tape. Probably don't need it, but I'm doing it anyhow. Can't hurt it. I'll tighten my switch back in here, and again, I don't know why it was that tight in the first place. I'm gonna tighten it, but not like they had it. I can tighten a couple more turns past that. You can always snug it up later. It's too hard to break it off and then try to fix it. So I got that in place. I'm gonna go ahead and put it up in here. So I'm bolting my splitter on here, and the bolt that's on the short side is not long enough, so hopefully you got some spare bolts or screws laying around that'll fit. Right, now that I got the top one started, I'm gonna go ahead and put it back on again. Got my splitter on, I got my top line started. I'm gonna go ahead and start my bottom line here. Let's see, my washer's in there correctly. I'll probably get online and see if I can find one of these for Z1. It probably has both lines, so it basically will keep both lines from turning, but for right now, I'm gonna put it on like this and just tighten it down again to make sure it doesn't leak. Again, you don't want to super crush those, but you want to crush them tight enough or smash them tight enough to crush the washers in there. So I've got my new upper and lower brake line here. I'm going to go ahead and thread my upper onto my lower real quick so I can fit it in place. I'm not going to tighten it. You should not have to thread lock these because these are flared on the end. So when it goes up in there, it should seat in there and keep it from leaking. So no thread lock needed there. Again, I'm not tightening it. I'm just putting it on there because I'm going to fit it in place, and then we'll tighten it up after I get it fitted. So after a little fight to backtrack a little bit here, I basically, without scratching my fender up, I couldn't really get that lined up properly. So I popped this back off, popped the line through it first, and then I'm gonna go ahead and put it back in place. And it doesn't always work out perfect, unfortunately. So now I can tighten my bolts up. And again, I probably could have fought with that for a little bit and got it in place, but it just wasn't worth the hassle. Sometimes you spend longer trying to make something work than just taking it apart and fixing it right in the first place. Okay. Now my bottom line, again, wraps back around the front here. Like so. Line up in there. So I'm ready to put the new rotor on. Got my bolts ready. On the back of this wheel, I don't know if I can get the camera angle just right. Probably can this way. You'll see there's a bunch of little like yellow stoppers in there. Those are just plastic inserts to keep dirt out of the inside of the wheel. When you take your new bolt and start it, it'll actually just push that piece of plastic right out the back side of it. Just like that. So I'm just going to do that to all 6 of them real quick. And if you have to pick those bolts up, those are an 8M 1 pitch. So it's a 8M1, not a 1.25. Again, just running them down till they stop. Close. And just going to crisscross on your tightening. Again, if you're new to a torque wrench, when it clicks, it's done. That doesn't mean keep on turning. So as soon as it clicks, you stop. Again, look at your locking tabs. If they're all lined up, you're good. Fold them over. If not, like this one needs to adjust a little bit. I'll pull it tighter a little bit more. Just enough I can get the locking tab up above it. Same on this one. A couple of these are pretty close to the wheel, so I'm just going to take a flathead and get them started. Try not to tear up your paint. Back to my extension to tap them on in. If I put that other caliper on first, I'm probably not going to get my wheel back in, so I'm going to leave this off. You can see it's a close fit anyhow. The other caliper is definitely not going to go in there. I'm going to go ahead and line up my wheel. I'm going to lift my wheel up in place and we'll drop the caliper on. I don't have the washer on there yet. I just got one nut. Again, same on the other side. The cap should be right as an easy in there. You shouldn't see a gap on the front or the back side of either one. If you do, you need to make sure you're tightening them up so the cap comes up evenly. You don't want to cross your cap. And then run it so your cap's even on both sides. A torque wrench. We got about 16 foot-pounds on these. I can't find a torque setting on these. I'm going by the torque chart. Online, basically it's an 8mm bolt. 8mm bolt with a 125 thread. It says anything basically 16 foot-pounds for that. So we're going to go with that. Alright, so our caliper on. Pushed in the piston a little bit on it. It should slide right over top. And it does. Mine's going in a different direction. Alright, as you can tell about my utter silence there for a second, basically the Z1 caliper, I never paid any attention until just now. I don't know enough about it, obviously. Feeds in from the top, whereas the H2 caliper feeds in from the back. So that's it, besides filling up my brake lines, again bleeding them out, getting the brake fluid in the lines, getting the air out of the brakes. Oh, one last thing, don't forget to connect your brake light switch, which I almost did. And again, that's going to fit a little bit tighter because that splitter is bigger than the other one, but again, don't think the wiring matters. Again, it's just a switch that basically pressure pushes the switch, closes the contact, and turns the light on. All right, so I'm ready to fill the system back up. So I'm going to fill it up with .4 with the lid still off the master cylinder. What you want to do is you want to pull the brake and see how I'm getting those bubbles. So basically I've got hardly any brake handle at all. So my brake handle's all the way back in. You don't want to do that rapidly, do it slowly and let go slowly. And you can actually see the piston going back and forth in there. Basically the hole in the back is the intake, and the hole in the front side, the way I've got the camera here, is where the air is going to come back through. So that's sucking in the fluid here and it's pushing it down the line. Air is going to be lighter, so the air is going to kind of find its way up the brake line, or it's going to get trapped somewhere down in the bottom. So by having no handle at all, as you can see when I push, the air that's coming back up the line is actually coming back out through that hole now. So again, slowly, not rapidly. It's not like a car where you just pump it 500 times and then crack the line open. We're going to do this slow until basically we've got no bubbles coming out of there. And then one last time we'll break the bleed line. bleed the brake lines. So I'm starting to get a nice good grip on here. I've got a pretty firm handle, but it's still not the way it should be. Again, another bubble out of it. So I'm still getting air out of here. So I'm just going to keep doing this until basically I'm not seeing any air bubbles. Now I've got a brake handle now, so technically you could bleed them out of the bottom, but personally it's easier to get all this out of this top line for me and then bleed the bottom, because most likely what will happen is everything from the new splitter down there is going to settle overnight and it's going to come up this way. So if you let it set for a night or a day, put your lid on, of course, so you don't get stuff in your master cylinder, but sometimes you got extra line out of there. But no matter what, you're going to probably have to bleed the bottom out. I would never put it back together without bleeding the bottoms. And again, just keep doing this until basically like that is fluid. So you can tell that's fluid pushing up through there, not air bubbles. So I'm going to squeeze it one more time. Again, let go. Squeeze it again. And I'm just getting fluid pushing through now. So I've got all the line, or sorry, I've got all the fluid into the master cylinder I'm going to get in there. So you can either gravity bleed the brakes again, or you can actually pressure bleed them. In this case, since I've done a new master cylinder, I've got a new splitter, a new caliper. There's a lot of places to get air bubbles in them, so I'm actually going to pressure bleed it. And by doing that, it's going to be hard for me to hold the camera, stay out of the way. But I'm going to give it a shot. But basically, we're going to pump the brake just like you would a car. Hold the brake lever, crack a bleeder open, and then, so we're going to crack the bleeder open fast, tighten the bleeder fast. Whatever you do when you squeeze this, don't let the handle go before you tighten the bleeder back up, because if you do, you're going to suck air right back through there and back up into your lines, and you're going to be starting all over again. One other thing is you don't need the cap on to bleed these out. So basically I'm going to fill my cylinder back up again. I'm leaving the cap off. Just make sure you don't fill it all the way to the top this time, because when you squeeze that, as you can see, that little bubble pushes up through there with the air or with the fluid in it. If you get air or something in there, you don't want it bubbling up and running all over the place. Okay, so there's my setup. Fluid is up to about here. My hose is underneath the fluid. I've checked my clearance, so when I turn this, I can actually move the bottle back and forth without it falling off, so I don't drop the wrench. Back that up just a little bit. Again, hopefully you got the right size hose and stuff. I'm making do with what I've got. So that gives me enough room to move that back and forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to squeeze the brake lever and hold it. Don't pump it. I'm going to turn this open. My brake lever drops. I'm closing the valve before I let go of the brake lever. You don't need to super tighten it because we're going to reopen it again. I'm going to let it up. If you did have this above the fluid, if you didn't have the valve closed all the way, it would suck air. If I didn't get the valve closed all the way that way, at least it's sucking fluid back up the line, even though it's going to push the air back down the line again, but you're still not going to suck a big glob of air in there. And eventually we'll get it cleaned out, so I'm going to do this probably through another master cylinder full of fluid. Then I'll do the other side. So squeeze, I've got a really firm handle. Break it loose. As soon as the handle starts dropping, you can stop turning your valve and then tighten it back up. I go to the handle, squeeze, open, tighten, and repeat. Check my master cylinder, still got fluid in it. It's down to about where it normally would be. We'll do this side one more time. I'm getting a really good firm handle up here, so hold it, open it. I'm not seeing any bubbles in my fluid either. If you watch your fluid, that will also tell you. Kind of like we got bubbles up top. When you're doing this, if you're seeing your fluid, which I know I've got a yellow bottle, sorry, I don't have another clear bottle that doesn't have water or something in it. Basically, I'm watching the fluid and I'm watching for bubbles. If I keep doing this and I've got 0 bubbles, then basically I've got all the air on this side. Okay, same thing for this side. Again, I've got my line fed down into my fluid. I'm down below the fluid line, so if I let go, it doesn't suck air back into it. I've got fluid in my master cylinder, so I'm going to squeeze the brake lever. As soon as I get pressure, I'm going to open the bleeder. As soon as my handle goes almost all the way down, tighten the bleeder. Let my brake lever up, Again, put pressure. You don't have to pump it. It's not like a car where you're building up a booster. I'm going to pull the handle. Pull it out. Closed. And again, if you open that bleeder all the way, your handle will drop super fast. And then you got to kind of struggle to get it back closed before you let go of the handle. So I'm putting pressure on the handle, open the bleeder slowly. As soon as I feel the handle start to go, before I get to the bottom, I'm tightening the bleeder up. And again, I'm just watching in my fluid here for bubbles. I'm going to bleed through probably a full master cylinder just to make sure, because like right now I'm getting a lot of bubbles out of there. So that's the end result. Master cylinder, brake splitter, new line coming down, Z1 caliper, Z1 right hand brake line, new rotor, bolts, and went up with dual brakes. Took it out today, made a couple slow stops, came back, cleaned it back up again, rechecked all my fittings, took it out, cranked it up, and didn't have any problem stopping. Stops on a dime. Again, make sure you torque all your bolts, make sure your brake lines aren't leaking.